Consider supporting Archaeosoup on Patreon for as little as $1 per month. Link available in the video description. Hello and welcome back to another Real World Archaeology. In this series we cast an archaeological eye over film, television and other forms of entertainment to understand how historically and archaeologically accurate they are. Today we're going to be returning to 2008's movie 10,000 BC. And you may recall that in part 1 this film accrued a score of 17 good to 21 bad, which really isn't bad. Well, no, it is bad technically, but it could be worse. It could be so much worse. And I think we need to bask just for a moment in that score. 21 bad, 17 good. We're 38 minutes and 27 seconds into the film, and at that point I actually had to go and do an errand, so it was a good place to end part 1. But we've got an hour to go in the movie, and I've made plenty of notes. So sit down, strap in, and let's see where this takes us, shall we? Now, Delay, our hero Delay, you may recall he was in a bamboo forest having been chased by a giant ostrich-type creature, and he rushes back to where he had last seen Evelette in the confusion, in the chase, but she, as we know, has been recaptured. We see her being beaten briefly, and she's forced to rejoin the slave train, and they move on out of stage left. They've gone. Delay finds, unfortunately, that Tik-Tik was injured in the fray, and he's lying amongst the long grass, bleeding. And at this point, there's actually a couple of goods I'd like to highlight. As Delay continues his pursuit of the slaves and the bad guys, he actually puts Tik-Tik on a stretcher. He fashions a stretcher and drags him with him. And this is demonstrating behaviour that in the past people didn't think that prehistoric people were capable of, and that is nurturing and caring for each other. In particular, tending the infirm and the elderly. So it's nice to see people being humane, as it were, in a film like this. The second good, I'm going to give it another good actually for this, is that we see Delay using fire to cauterize one of Tik-Tik's wounds. Again, a basic knowledge of how to look after each other, how to look after yourself, would have been crucial in hunting parties out in the landscape, removed from your village or your tribe or whatever you want to call it. So it's nice to see a couple of good things kicking off this section of the movie. Delay decides to go hunting at night, and this is where it starts to get weird again, even more weird in fact, because we seemingly are suddenly in the savannah. Now you may recall that the geography in this film is a bit weird. We start off in sort of Europe, go to maybe sort of northern India, into sort of maybe the Far East, into China-ish with the bamboo forests, maybe sort of Bangladesh, that kind of area with the geology. And then we sort of seemingly now have skipped the Middle East and North Africa, and we're in the savannah. Anyway, Delay is hunting at night and falls into a giant pit, a trap that someone has set for large animals, it seems, with wooden spikes at the bottom. Somehow he hasn't been skewered, but it starts to rain, and the rain is pouring in, thunder and lightning, and he wakes up to find vultures pecking at the flesh of other creatures that have fallen into the pit. Now, at this point, the narrator says that Delay would come face to face with the mighty beast who ruled the land, or ruled these lands at least. And there is another creature thrashing about in the watery pit. It seems to be a cat of some sort. Is it a lion, maybe? A lion would be incredible. No. No, it's not a lion. And this is the thing that I've been dreading. It's hinted at on the cover of the film, on the posters and on the DVD box art. And that is, this creature is a saber-tooth cat. You can see its long teeth, and it is basically trapped and is sort of drowning. Now, I'm going a little bit quiet here because I'm actually, rather than angry or annoyed, I'm more disappointed, really. I sort of praised the film in part 1 for trying to find something that was plausible as an alternative to the sort of velociraptors in the long grass from the Lost World. They found some ostrich type thing. But in this instance, it's very important, I think, that we acknowledge how wrong this is. Saber-tooth cats were not around in North Africa, in Europe or in Asia at this point. And this is part of the reason that people were able to successfully spread into Europe, in fact. It's because they weren't being hunted and eaten by saber-toothed cats. Now, cats like this were around in North America at the time. The Smilodon, or Smilodon, I think it's Smilodon. Fairly large saber-toothed animals, but not as large as portrayed in this movie as well. They've really beefed up and embiggened this creature to a slightly ridiculous extent. But I'm just disappointed that they felt the need to do this. It's a stereotype, and it's moving into the realm of Flintstones. You know, we've avoided dinosaurs so far, and that's to be commended. But suddenly, with the saber-toothed tiger cat and the potential for interaction with that creature, I'm just disappointed really by this. But anyway, the cat is trapped and drowning. And Delay decides to set it free. Before he does, he says, "Do not eat me when I release you." Which of course is going to work, because all cats listen to human beings, right? Anyway, the cat does come free and circles the pit and approaches Delay in the rain. It's quite dramatic, actually. Sniffs him really close, right up against the wall, the mud wall of the pit. And then jumps out of the pit, completely ignoring a potential meal. So that's kind of cool. And I found myself going, oh, have they bonded? Is this going to be one of those moments? And I could just smell the Hollywood potential in this creature not eating him. Anyway, Delay climbs out of the pit, and by morning has regrouped with Tick-Tick, who seemingly is feeling a bit better. And he relays that over the course of the night he's heard screams coming from the horizon, and now there's smoke rising in the morning from seemingly a village or something. Clearly the slave train went that way. And Delay and Tick-Tick pursue. They find themselves on the outskirts of very much an African village. So we are in Africa, it seems. This sort of, again, accurate to a period, just not this period, village is shown. We have sort of circular wattle and daub type huts, maybe with like stone bases, thatched roofs, defensive retaining wall, this kind of thing. And as they're going into the village, Tick-Tick even picks up an adze, a farming implement, which it's all just feeling a bit wrong for the period. It's just not quite right. And it only gets a bit worse when they find a bowl of food in the middle of the village and Tick-Tick rushes over. They start nibbling on the food. And then they're surrounded by men with shields and spears. And at this point, I'm so tempted to give this thing a bad, as it were, because of the pseudo-Zulu aesthetic that's going on. But I'm so astonished by what happens next that I completely forgot to. And I'm not going to retrospectively give it a bad just because I want to be churlish. Because what happens next is the saber-toothed cat returns. It jumps into the village, approaches Delay, and you're thinking, is he finally going to eat him now? Sniffs him, and then jumps over him and proceeds to protect Delay and Tick-Tick from the villagers. It's just weird. It's just incredibly weird. And actually, the reaction of the villagers very much mirrors my own. It's one of what? You speak to the spear-tooth, says one of the not Zulus to Delay. And at this point, Tick-Tick is taken aback and says, "You speak our language? What?" And it soon becomes clear that Delay's father passed through this area many years ago. You may recall at the beginning of the film, our hero's dad abandoned, as it were, the village because he was eager to try and find an answer to their problems. And it seems that he has passed through and taught the local people the language of the Yagal people. And it's all kind of charming, you know, everyone's gathered around looking at these two new people, these foreigners eating food and sharing stories. And at this point, there's a great big whopping bad. And the bad is the food that they're eating. Delay is eating this red shiny thing that he puts in his mouth and starts to cough because it's really hot. Starts hiccuping, in fact, as well. People are sort of giggling, and as he goes, it's this is different kind of thing. And he's eating a red hot chili pepper. This is bad. This is very bad because these weren't available in Africa, in Europe, or whatever, in the old world at all until the 15th century. Christopher Columbus is one of the first people in Europe to experience the red hot chili pepper. In fact, it's called a pepper because it reminds him of the heat of ground pepper back in the old world. So that's a bad, sadly. Peppers were not a thing. The leaders of the village tell Delay and Tik-Tik of the story of Delay's father, how he came to the village and how he was taken away by evil men, and this story has been recorded on a rock art, outdoor rock art, not just cave art, is being used to tell the story, and that I think deserves a good. It's a use of rock art to record a little piece of history, a story that they want to remember and want to retell, and that's likely how people used rock art in the past, or one of the uses for rock art in the past. And at this point we're also introduced to the idea that the one who can speak to the Saber-tooth will save everyone. So there's like a prophecy element going on, and it's cheesy, very cheesy, but I don't think it deserves a bad. It's just cheesy. We rejoin the slave train, and Baku has seemingly now been tied to a character called Tudu, who is the son of the leader of the village that we've just seen. So that he must have been kidnapped in last night's attack. And so the two of them are starting to bond, starting to get to know each other, when suddenly the one-eyed slave trader, the non-Arab stereotype, comes over and starts beating Baku. Tudu tries to help out but can't because he's only a small boy, and Evelet tries to help by getting one of the other slave traders, the leader of the group, to intervene. And the two slave traders, it looks like they're gonna maybe have a fight, but they don't. They just about hold off from one another, but clearly tension is building up within the ranks. At this point, the narrator gets a bit poetic, shall we say. The word of the Naku, which is the tribe who Tik-Tik and Delay have been staying with overnight, travelled fast, and from all winds came many warriors. The tuk-tuk, who move like big running birds and hide their eyes behind trees, describing wooden masks, that is. The tribe of the Kura, they are short like our young ones. The Agal, that is, or rather so the narrator being from the Agal, describing these people as being short like the Agal children. And from the valley without sun came the ones with blood on their heads. But the strongest of them all were from the Huta. Now, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with elements of this poetic description because it's slightly uncomfortable undertones of primitivism here. Yes, okay, it could be a cute linguistic thing, the idea of those who hide their heads, their faces behind trees, but they're masks, they're wooden masks. Surely to goodness there'd be other words for mask than tree. I mean, it's gone through a process. People would understand that. So this feels like the writers writing something that they think sounds, you know, cool and primitive, and just comes off as being patronising, I think, in some respects. But anyway, I'm not going to give that a score. I just thought I'd just flag it, as it were. Everyone is walking and walking and walking until eventually there is news that the red birds have arrived. And the red birds were a part of the rock art story. It's how people apparently are taken on by the evil men across the desert on the wings of red birds. And at this point I was wondering, well, what could this be? Are they actually going to show giant prehistoric birds? What's happening? But actually what they are boats. And this, I think, deserves a bad, because this is absolutely patronising. These are boats which, okay, fair play. The sails are to the right and to the left, so, or to port and to starboard. So they look like red wings on large ships, actually, large boats, ships. The sails do look like red wings, but they are boats, and everyone would recognise these as being boats, not birds. Some of the earliest evidence for example, canoe making, one of the, I think the third oldest canoe in the world, comes from, for example, Africa. It's 8,000 years old, discovered in Nigeria, called the Dufuna canoe. And it's as old as other finds, for example, in Europe, so on and so forth. So it's lasted as long as that stuff, and it shows that people in Africa were making boats before 10,000 BC, before the period that 10,000 BC the movie is portraying. Certainly, if people are making large ships, then people would know what a boat was. They wouldn't be surprised by a boat and call them red birds. Also, as well, the key here as well is that they would also recognise that these birds aren't flying over the desert; they're sailing on a river through the desert. It's patronising, it's primitivism for primitivism's sake, and I think in conjunction with that strange description of the masks, I think this definitely deserves a bad. It's characterising people as actually stupid, and therefore primitive, if you see what I mean. So I don't like it at all. Although it is an interesting idea, the idea that these sails are going in different directions, are sort of crossed like the wings of birds. Delay cries out for Everlet at this point from the banks of the river, and the gathered tribes shake their spears and get the attention of the people on the boats, giving the slaves hope, as it were. Now, at this point, the tribes elect to follow these guys on the river by marching into the desert, very sort of Lawrence of Arabia-ish, in marching out across the Badlands where no one has ever gone before. And the description here is where the hills all look the same, and they end up losing their way and walking in circles, for example. And this I'm going to give this a bad as well because of the lack of navigation skills. East and west can be monitored using the sun, for example, and certainly the night sky should be something which you can call on if you're walking into a desert. If you know roughly which way the boats are going, you should be able to navigate, even though the hills do all look kind of the same. That night, Everlet is given a strong warning by the leader of the slave traders that no one has ever successfully crossed the sand, and so she shouldn't expect her hero to follow. But that very same night, Delay remembers that the head of the snake, the tip of the river where the boats are heading, lies underneath the light that does not move in the night sky. Now this was part of the story that he was told using rock art, and if you recall, the light in the sky that does not move, probably the North Star, is the light that he refers to at the beginning of the film when he swears his love for Everlet on that unmoving light. He says something like, you are like that light, you do not move from my heart, this kind of thing. So we do finally have some nighttime navigation, good lord, using stars in the night sky. I'll give it a good. There you go, I'll balance out the bad with the good. So they do finally decide to navigate, goodness me, just as people in the past could. Our heroes march on through the desert until they come across a small valley in the sand where the bones of elephants, possibly mammoth I guess, although that would be silly in the desert, wouldn't it? So elephants and humans are scattered, bleached by the sun. And suddenly a horn blows, and then, well, I'm sorry, I need a drink, I just do. There are pyramids! There are pyramids in this film! Yes, folks, there are pyramids in this film. 10,000 BC, fuck it. They were like 5,000 years out of sync now. These pyramids are, well, first of all, I mean, that deserves a bad. There's a bad right there. But then there's more bads here, I think. First of all, they're using mammoth and people to build the pyramids. Mammoth in the desert, bad. And also, these are smooth-sided pyramids. That's not the first type of pyramid that was built. Stepped pyramids were the first ones to be built. So seemingly they've skipped all sort of technological development, all this sort of architecture, years of culture that went into developing the technology for a smooth-sided pyramid. That's a bad as well. So 3 bads in a row there. Now it's worthwhile noting that the pyramid of Djoser, the stepped pyramid that I referred to, one of the first one of the first pyramids actually in Egypt, was built around 2650-ish BCE. Measured 62 meters tall, so not as tall by any stretch of the imagination as these things in this movie, and crucially it was a stepped pyramid. So yeah, it's ridiculous. There's gold on top of of the biggest of these mountains of the gods, which Baku and Tudu are beaten up for touching. Of course they are. And honestly, this is starting to feel like Stargate. This is just... In fact, you know what? Do you mind? Yeah, I'm just gonna go and watch a better film. Hang on, sorry. Stargate. Oh, North Africa, 8000 BC. That's 2,000 years after 10,000 BC. Classic Egyptology. A Stargate. Peer review? Oh, you maverick. Maverick. Oh, I've got that book. The Face of Tutankhamun. Money way. Money way. Money way. What's that mean? Okay. Yeah! That was a good film. Yeah, same director and everything. I mean, this would work if it was like a prequel to that. This could be quite cool, but anyway, okay. So Baku sees these sort of proto-ancient Egyptians whipping a downed mammoth and saying, "How could these men do this?" And one of his Yagal friends says, "These men are not men. They're not human beings. They do not respect the great Manak, just as the Yagal do." Again, as I praised in part 1 of this film, the Yagal having an affinity for the creatures that they hunt. Um, in this section, they sort of, I suppose they revisit that affinity. He says, "These are not men like us. Some say they came from the stars. Others believe they flew across the great water from a land that sank beneath the sea." So aliens in Atlantis. That deserves a bad, I think. Definitely. Oh. Okay. The leader of the bad guys is being carried along, I blame the gin, being carried along on a veiled wagon by slaves. Of course he is. Like a sort of a throne with a veil over it, and a horn blows, and tens of thousands of people, slaves all, they stop what they're doing, they drop to the floor, and his evil lieutenant type person is like a priest with sort of Halloween gold fingers on, you know, the sort of witch's fingers you could buy as a kid, this sort of Halloween but, you know, gold ones. He runs over and sort of says, you know, "Oh my lord," and the guy on the throne kind of says, "The people need to work faster, make a sacrifice." And so, of course, one of Baku's friends, one of the Agal, is chosen arbitrarily for a sacrifice, thrown off the top of a pyramid, and just lands splat on essentially a block that's being dragged up as part of the construction. There's no sense of ceremony. It's just arbitrary, just murder. Actually, there's no sacrifice. Typically, anthropologically, archaeologically, involves more than just killing someone. So I think that deserves a bad, actually, because all they're doing really here is just in that sort of script Hollywood kind of mentality. We need to show that this guy's really bad. Let's have him murder someone. Yeah, but actually, there's no purpose to this murder. It's simply random killing, which isn't actually the best way to motivate people. Which is probably why the pyramids weren't built by a whole load of slaves. But anyway, we should move on from that. So I think that deserves a bad anyway. Meanwhile, the leader of the slave train has taken a liking to Evelette and pays a guard for her, basically takes her away. And then funnily enough, actually, their language sounds more and more like Tatooine in Star Wars.
Mori.
Hey, you want my longer?
It's true. I mean, they do sound like they're from Star Wars at this point. I don't know what they've done to the voices, but they've done something digitally just to sort of give them that blah, 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 kind of thing. I mentioned this in part 1, and it's just silly at this point. It really is. Anyway, Dele and the leader of the Naku sneak into the prison block at the base of the pyramid. Sorry, the mountains of the gods, where the slaves are being held in metal cages. Metal cages. There shouldn't be metal cages at this point. We've already touched on this. There should not be metal in 10,000 BC. So that's another bad. Oh, we're only 1 hour and 5 minutes into the film. There's another 40 minutes to go, but we'll be fine. We can do this. We can do this. Dele, of course, learns of the nasty sacrifice of one of his fellow Yagal and seeks the forgiveness of his other friends who are being held captive. And they produce a blind wise man out of a pit in the ground. This is getting really quite surreal. Apparently he ran away from being in service to these gods who are in charge of the society, and they've been hiding him underground in the slave prison ever since. And he says that there were 3 gods, now there's only 1. They fear only the one who wears the mark of the hunter, the brightest star in the night sky. Without the mark, you cannot bring down the gods. Now that's all a bit mysterious, mystic, as it were, mysticism. Dele notices that the blind man is wearing his father's wristband, in fact, and asks, where did you get this? But it becomes clear that Dele's father actually saved this wise man and helped to hide him. But he's now dead, and his bones are probably in that sort of graveyard that they came across in the desert. Dele and co are pursued by 3 guards who spot the many spears who are camping out in the desert on the edge of this building site. Suddenly Tick-Tick emerges and removes the head of his white spear and starts fighting the 3 guards rather expertly. He bests them and their metal weapons. But I won't give it another bad. We've already touched on the metal is bad twice, in fact, I guess, in these videos. And he's ultimately stabbed, though, sadly, by a treacherous, not quite dead guard. So Tick-Tick dies, but not before he can hand the white spear to Delay. And it's all very emotional. Meanwhile, the slave train leader, the lead horseman, has had Evelette beautified, made up in new clothes and makeup. She now has hair beads, and he exclaims in his oddly deep voice, "Come to me," in his language as well. "I have set you free. Now I will make you mine." And it's interesting how women are always someone's. I guess anthropologically that's kind of correct in some respects for many parts of the world, but it's interesting how in this film they're really reinforcing that. At the beginning of the movie, Evelette was going to be claimed by the leader of the hunt, and now she's been claimed by the leader of the slave traders. He embraces her, and she subtly goes to grab his dagger, the metal dagger, Doesn't deserve a bad though. We've already touched on this. It's fine. Anyway, she goes to grab the dagger and is interrupted when someone bursts in through the door and accuses him of having stolen her as a slave from their master. She is examined by one of these sort of priestly-like figures, and it's shown that she has scars on her hands, or sort of wounds, from where earlier in the film, if you remember, the leader of the slave traders whipped her with a metal whip! Metal whip! Anyway, whipped her and left her scarred on the hand. Of course she was going to want to be with him after that. The priest suddenly freaks out at these wounds on her hand. This is reported to the Halloween-fingered man, the lieutenant of the veiled pharaoh-type figure, and he's camped out in the middle of the night next to a sphinx. Next to a sphinx. That's a bad. 10,000 BC. Anyway, she's then taken up some temple steps. No, hang on. So this is just nonsense. These temple steps, the whole thing is just, it screams Karnak. It screams ancient Egypt. I mean, this is really, I just wanted to just ancient Egypt, high sort of, you know, architecture of that civilization, and various buildings from various periods in that civilization should not be appearing at 10,000 BC anywhere. Anyway, moving on. But that's a bad. I'm going to give it another bad. The Sphinx got a bad. I know the pyramids have got a bad, but now all this other stuff, it's bad. It's Anyway, inside this temple thing, which is also seemingly partly a boathouse, but we'll get back to that in a bit. There's an office, and on the desk of the office, she briefly sees a map of the world with a modern projection of the new and old world drawn on paper or skin or something, with a compass drawing out lines from a point in the Atlantic. Maybe this is meant to be where the Atlantis was or something in this film. And now I've gone quiet again because this is just ridiculous. This is, I mean, how we draw the world was something that we slowly decided over many years. People still to this day argue over how what's called a projection is drawn, how we actually try and represent a spherical world on a flat piece of paper. So the fact that it looks so similar to a modern projection is just weird. You know, I mean, like medieval maps of the world had a very particular look to them, and they were, you know, Ooh. But crucially, none of those maps had America. South America, in fact, I think is visible in this map. But just... It's bad. It's bad. In comes Halloween Fingers Man, the lieutenant of the big bad, the high priest or whatever, examines the marks on her hands, the scars, the wounds, confirms that this is indeed the mark, the star constellation that they all fear, and he runs off to tell his boss, the god, the big, the pharaoh type person, who is, again, veiled in these mysterious trappings. He has lots of cloth hanging around him. His clothes are very delicate and elegant. He has lots of pale slaves, almost like albino looking people surrounding him. And this, I'm going to give it a good. Now bear with me. I'm going to give it a good, not because it's accurate to anything really, although it does again remind me of Stargate. It's good because this is how people for millennia have created a sense of mystique around themselves. In many respects, the building of the pyramids, the building of great monumental structures, are an extension of this. That leadership, particularly leadership who claim to be from linked with the gods, and the pharaohs often were said to be either living gods or descended from the gods or connected with the gods. This is partly how the theatre of that political assertion would play out, would be in having these weird ceremonies and spaces and veils separating you from the immortal, all this sort of stuff. So it's going to get a good for the aesthetic of it. It kind of gets a good there. Dallaire has now picked up the white spear, and he gives a speech referencing the speech that Tik-Tik gave at the beginning of the film to the Agal, saying that we are the people who hunt the mighty Manak. He is great and we are small, but we still bring him down because we fight together as one, which is all very Hollywood, and it works, I suppose, for the story. Together as one, they all shout out, and they start to infiltrate the building site. Dallaire finds the lead bull in this truly monumental, monstrously ridiculous scale building site. Finds the lead bull again, referencing the hunting scene at the beginning of the film, the main male mammoth, and they try to get it to charge. And then as one, suddenly the Agal slaves break free, and one of them in particular starts to hold off a platoon of soldiers who are running up the ramp to try and stop this little rebellion from breaking out. The mammoth, though, do finally stampede. People start to rise up. Many thousands of slaves are rushing towards the sort of office block boathouse building where the pharaoh lives. and all these thousands of people are suddenly confronted with 2 rows of soldiers and Evelette on the steps outside the building with a rope on each arm, ready to be pulled apart by horses. And suddenly horns are blown and everyone stops in their tracks. And at this point it gets a bit dramatic. Dallaire accepts the offer of the bad guy to halt the rebellion in order to save Evelette's life and return for each and every of his Yagal brothers. Dallaire slowly approaches the steps, asking what will happen to the other people as well in this deal that they're trying to make. Of course, the lieutenant of the pharaoh says they belong to the god and they will do his work forever. At this point, Dallaire says no, they will not, and throws his spear, which now this surprised me actually. This doesn't normally happen in a film, like immediately. Normally like there's a dramatic, miss, something like in 300 where like the spear misses the head of Xerxes or something. It actually skewers the guy. It skewers this god, and he sort of in slow motion falls down the steps. Everyone's like, and then comes my favourite line of the whole film. Dallaire says, "He is not a god." The uprising starts again. The head slave trader kidnaps Evelette on a horse, tries to ride away. Baku and Tudu have like a fighty moment with the one-eyed, slightly rapey, non-Arab stereotype man. Ultimately, he gets killed. Not the bad guy gets killed, not the good guys, obviously. The priests run into the boathouse and set the red sails on the ship that's waiting inside. As they're going to sail away before they are hacked down by the tens of thousands of slaves who have followed them. Evelette, who's on the horse, being kidnapped by this guy, picks an arrow from his quiver, stabs him in the side. They both fall off the horse. Delaire runs to catch up. The slaver shoots an arrow into Evelette's back, and Evelette falls to the ground. Evelette is dead. And at this point, Old Mother, the wise woman from the beginning of the movie, who first sets out this whole story in motion, she has been meditating on their journey this whole time, and she actually suffers a wound in sympathy with Evelette, so she starts to die as well, and everyone gathers around her. We see Delaire confront the slave trader, who says, if I can't have her, neither can you, in his sort of Tatooine Star Wars voice, and Delaire beats him basically to death. All the buildings all around are being set on fire, and the slaves are just overthrowing everything, but Evelette, in the midst of this destruction, is dead. There's a single little moment there, and Delaire puts the necklace, her necklace that he recovered as he was tracking her across the world, it seems, back into her hands, and he's very upset. He's in despair, and he approaches a mammoth. There's a mammoth now walking past, who is apparently a conduit for the spirit of Old Mother, which I'm going to give a good. I'm going to give this a good because it plays to animism. This is a prehistoric belief that we think people likely had. That not only did they have an affinity with the creatures that they hunted, but also that you could sort of become a creature, probably through copious amounts of drugs. But there's a hint here of animism, and I like that. So Old Mother uses this mammoth as a conduit to pass her spirit into the child with the blue eyes, into Evelette, and Evelette, of course, comes back to life. Hollywood cliche, without a doubt. Now, the narrator says, this is a bit more or less from where her legend begins, and it is weak writing. It is mystical nonsense. It's a tremendous get-out clause of epic proportions, but I kind of like the animism twist. Funnily enough, actually, in my notes, I was very, very mean on this section here. But thinking about it, I kind of like it, so I'm not going to give it a bad. I'm going to give it a good. It's terrible writing, but I'm choosing to see something positive there. I'm trying. Everyone shouts out in celebration, and then we cut to Delaire receiving a bag of seeds from the Naku. And we're told that his father wanted to bring these seeds back to the Yagal in order to feed their people. The whole point of this film at the beginning is that the mammoth are coming less and less frequently, and that essentially what we're told is agriculture will save them from starvation. And this is good-ish, because that's arguably, possibly one of the reasons that people did start to become farmers in Europe, was because of population pressure or food or climate, or something shifted and changed and started to make them want to have a more controllable food resource, in terms of, if you farm something, if you nurture it, it will grow, and you can rely upon that harvest, as it were. For example, at this point, around about this point in time, 11,000 to 9,500 BC, we do see people taking up farming in the Levant and Mesopotamia. So not in Africa, not in the savannah where the African village is, but in Levant and Mesopotamia, rye, emmer wheat, corn, I think, is it einkorn maybe at this point? I'm not quite sure. Other crops were starting to be cultivated around about this time. So this is good-ish. It's touching on a truth, just about, from arm's length, but it's touching on something. But it is nonetheless nonsense. But I'm going to give it a good, because it hints that agriculture comes next, I guess. The Naku and the Yagal part ways, and there's a long journey home, which happens in one cut, I might add. So this journey back through sort of Southeast Asia into Europe happens with one cut, and mercifully there are 10 minutes of credits to this film. So actually the whole thing ended 10 minutes earlier than I thought it would. It ends with a shot of Delay and Evelette on the edge of a lake, having just planted some crops and starting to see them grow. And the final line of the film from the narrator is, "The promise of life was fulfilled." And I'm sure in the heads of the writers, that's a beautiful little arc. You know, you start off with the mammoth are going missing. How can we get these people food? Oh, here we go, there we go. And at the end we have agriculture. But the journey, the path, and that's the point of a movie, isn't it? It's the story between the beginning and the end is just mostly nonsense, and that's a real shame. So this movie, from an archaeological perspective, is terrible. It's just awful. It could have worked from an entertainment sort of standpoint as like a weird prequel to Stargate, but there's nothing really that actually ties into Stargate. You don't actually see, for example, you know, the gate or anything that hints that these guys are related to, you know, to the gods in Stargate. I could have actually accepted this as something that's in that, you know, that cinematic universe, as they say. But since they don't say that, and since there's so many things that do actually hint that this is the world that we know and that we study and that we love, that we live in fact, this film simply is terrible. It represents just a whole load of stereotypes and primitivism and patronizing nonsense. Now the thing is, I do get where they're coming from. They're coming from like the Hollywood tradition of the movie, you know, like 1 million years BC. Is it Raquel Welch? Yeah, the famous movie set in prehistoric times. But that came out in 1966. And a studio system at the time that was much more closed off in terms of how they produced entertainment. They were looking simply to produce entertaining movies, and yes, they fell back on stereotypes. They fell back on cartoon ideas about the past, because that was kind of where they were coming from. But a movie made in 2008, which has easy access to better information about the past, that tries to represent some of this information actually in certain places, that tries to avoid, for example, representing dinosaurs in the movie, and a Hollywood in 2008 that does make use of specialist advisors. In fact, I'd love to know if there was an advisor linked with this film. I shall check the credits. I shall put their name just here, if there is one. A movie that is seemingly trying to do the right thing in some places, is what I'm getting at, means that they've failed. In this instance, this isn't tongue-in-cheek, this isn't fun, this is actually deeply disappointing. And the fact that they couldn't represent prehistory without metal, they couldn't represent all of prehistory, you know, 300,000 years, actually 5 million years if you want to count pre-Homo sapiens humans, all of that time, they couldn't represent it without also showing us the pyramids, is just deeply disappointing. Ultimately, it's ridiculous and a bit of an insult to the good work of so many excellent archaeologists around the world. So, archaeologically, a terrible film. By most measures, in fact, this isn't a particularly good film in terms of how the story plays out, and also actually the way in which you're left with lots of questions as an audience member. If we put aside the historical inaccuracies, there's lots of stuff that's just not explained in this film. But I won't be getting rid of the DVD. I'm not going to give it to charity or something. I don't want someone else to have to watch. No. It's more a case of there's some of the stuff in there is kind of entertaining. I did like seeing the mammoth migrating through the landscape. That was quite a nice moment from an archaeologist's perspective. I've always wanted to see that sort of thing. But also as well, you know, there's stuff like that. He is not a god, which is, you know, it is fun. So there you go. You know, watch it if you want, but watch it with that tremendous caveat that it has nothing to do with archaeology. Anyway, guys, as ever, until next time, do take care. Bye-bye.